Giacomo Albano's book, Galactic Astrology, The Milky Way is a Bridge Between Worlds. If you've ever stared up at the night sky and felt like that glowing band of the Milky Way was way more than just distant stardust, well, you're definitely not alone. For basically all of human history, the galaxy has been viewed as a mystical gateway, a sort of cosmic river separating the earthly dimension from the divine. What we're doing today is exploring how Albano takes that ancient intuition and completely grounds it in the mathematically precise framework of stellar astrology.
Here's a quick look at how we'll break this down. We're going to cover the Milky Way bridge, the mechanics of the galactic grid, and what the book calls celestial activators. Then we'll dive into some major historical case studies, specifically the resurrection and the Marian apparitions, before wrapping up with how all of this connects to your own personal chart.
Section 1. The Milky Way Bridge, a cosmic gateway. This is the foundational concept we're working with here. Across different eras and cultures, the Milky Way hasn't just been observed as a pretty collection of stars. It's consistently been understood as a boundary line, the absolute frontier between the natural world and the supersensible dimensions. The source material drops this quote, noting that ancient esoteric conceptions of the Milky Way all converge on the idea of a mystical path, connecting the physical world and higher dimensions. And it really doesn't matter where you look in the historical record, whether it's Buddhist cosmology mapping the galaxy as an interconnection between planes of existence, or Native American shamanic traditions viewing it as an actual bridge for soul travel. The consensus is incredibly uniform. So Albano's work asks a fascinating question. What if we could mathematically map that mystical path? Section 2. The Galactic Grid, Mapping the Divine. This is where things get really interesting because the book shifts from cross-cultural philosophy straight into the hardcore mechanics of astrology. To understand this cosmic bridge, we have to look at the exact grid it rests on. To do that mapping, the author utilizes galactic coordinates. Unlike standard astrology that uses the Earth's ecliptic, this system completely reorients everything around the galactic center, which sits over in Sagittarius, and the galactic equator. You've got galactic longitude measuring 0 to 360 degrees around that center, and galactic latitude measuring up to 90 degrees above or below the plane. It's a completely shifted, massive scale way of orienting ourselves in space. And understanding that contrast is absolutely crucial. See, in standard coordinates, the positions of the stars shift noticeably over thousands of years because of the precession of the equinoxes. But when you look through the lens of galactic coordinates, most stars basically don't move relative to one another over those same millennia. They're virtually static. They reflect this incredibly deep, enduring cosmic architecture. Within that permanent architecture, the book points out that certain geometric angles hold immense power. Albano calls these the magical aspects. We're talking about angles like 0, 30, 45, 60, and 90 degrees. The theory is that when planets or stars hit these specific alignments along the galactic grid or distance themselves from the galactic center by these exact degrees, they acquire a unique power. This geometry is supposedly what's required to actually manifest major spiritual, initiatory, or supernatural events down here on Earth. Section 3, the celestial activators. Now, that brings up a really obvious question. If this galactic grid is basically static and stars sit in the same relationships for thousands of years, what actually triggers these massive events? Why does something happen in one specific year and not a century later? The text answers that with a concept called the higher octave. When the right celestial bodies slide into these magical galactic configurations, they're essentially invited to vibrate at a higher frequency. They transcend their normal, everyday earthly influences and become triggers for contacting super-sensible dimensions. But the real gears driving this cosmic clock are a very specific group of stars. The book zeroes in on a few remarkably fast-moving bright stars, specifically Sirius, Arcturus, and Rigil Kentaurus. These have a much greater proper motion than your average star, meaning their actual physical movement through space is faster. Over centuries, they actually changed their galactic coordinates enough to form brand new magical aspects. So you have Sirius acting as a huge cosmic amplifier, tied to the Great Mother archetype. You have Arcturus bringing about major historical shifts. Because these specific stars move fast enough, they function as activators, unlocking the latent potential built into that static galactic grid. Section 4, Stars of the Resurrection, a galactic case study. Let's look at how the author impartially applies this framework to a massive historical event, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. The argument here is that these weren't just purely spiritual milestones, but events perfectly mirrored by the sacred geometry of the Milky Way. Albano meticulously tracks the astrological data for April 33 AD. On April 3rd, the day of the crucifixion, the star Castor, which symbolically represents the human nature of Jesus, was perfectly conjunct on the galactic plane with Mars, the planet of suffering and passion. But then look at April 5th. Those painful alignments dissolve into incredibly benefic triggers. Venus and Mercury rise in the east in conjunction right at the exact moment the bright star Spica undergoes a super rare heliacal morning setting, slipping below the horizon right before sunrise. It's wild how the galactic grid unites all these complex symbols into one cohesive narrative. On the reported day of the resurrection, Pollux aligns with Jupiter. Venus perfectly mirrors Spica, the eternal symbol of the Virgin. And maybe the most striking part? A star from the Phoenix constellation, the ultimate symbol of rebirth from the ashes, locks into a flawless 90-degree magical aspect with Pollux. All the while, Sirius sits exactly 60 degrees away, massively amplifying the entire configuration. The cosmic signature is remarkably precise.
Section 5. The Marian Apparitions. The explainer also gets into how these exact same galactic mechanics are supposedly at work during world-famous Marian apparitions. If the Milky Way is a bridge, the text views these events as moments when something actually crosses over.
Looking objectively at the events at Lourdes and Guadalupe, the book points out a geometry that is hard to ignore. You consistently see stars that represent the Virgin Mary, stars like Calf, Polaris, and Spica. But during these specific apparitions, those Marian stars form perfect 30-degree and 60-degree magical aspects with other stars that represent the highly specific earthly details of the miracles themselves. To put that into perspective, at Lourdes, those Marian stars perfectly aligned with Alpheratz, representing the Maiden Bernadette, and Sadochbia, a star located in the water jar of Aquarius that perfectly mirrors the miraculous discovery of the water spring. At Guadalupe, the alignment featured the constellation Centaurus, representing the peasant Juan Diego, locking into a galactic aspect with Corona Australis, the floral crown, that perfectly mirrors the winter blooming of the Castilian roses. According to the author, the heavens literally describe what was happening on the ground. Section 6, your cosmic connection. All right, so we've covered sweeping historical shifts and major supernatural case studies, but how does this enormous galactic architecture actually matter for you on an individual level? Well, the book suggests you're practically wired into this cosmic grid. By checking your own natal chart for these exact galactic aspects, you can supposedly figure out your personal capacity for initiatory or spiritual experiences. You just follow the steps, find your specific manifestation and generative constellations, then scan for those magical 30, 60, or 90-degree angles between your natal planets and the fixed stars. Finally, check your angular distance to the galactic center. The theory is, wherever these alignments pop up in your chart, that's where the veil between worlds is thinnest for you.
And that really leaves us with something fascinating to think about. We've just seen how the sacred geometry of the Milky Way has reportedly mapped some of the most profound spiritual moments in human history. So, if those ancient mystics were right about this cosmic river all along, what hidden gateways are vibrating at a higher octave in your own cosmic blueprint, just waiting to be unlocked?